I'll admit something I've never said out loud. The night everything collapsed wasn't the night I got kicked out. It was the moment I realized someone I loved wanted me gone. My name is Natalie Hayes, and until that night, I thought being the quiet one in the family meant I was safe from real damage. I was wrong. The moment it happened is burned into me. One second I was stepping through the front door expecting the usual silence, and the next I was staring at accusations I didn't understand. Numbers, screenshots, conclusions already drawn. I hadn't even opened my mouth before the judgment hit me like I had been preparing for it my whole life. It wasn't confusion that froze me, it was recognition. A part of me had always sensed that if anything went wrong in our house, the blame would land on me first. I remember standing there, watching it all move too fast, the certainty in his eyes, the satisfaction in hers, the way the decision felt rehearsed. I wasn't shocked by the anger. I was shocked by how quickly it was unleashed, how easily the story made without me became the truth everyone accepted. For a few seconds, I wondered if defending myself would even matter. The answer arrived in the silence that followed. I walked away because something inside me broke cleanly, like a thread pulled tight for years finally snapping. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I stepped into the night, tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. I want to know how far this story reaches before everything else unfolds. And here's the part that still burns. What I did next changed more than just that night. It changed all of us. It didn't take long for the pieces of my family to show me how they fit together, even if I only understood it clearly in hindsight. Our house had a rhythm, and most days it felt like I was moving through it quietly while everyone else spoke a language I was never taught. I didn't resent it. I simply learned to read the silences and adjust myself around them. That was how life worked in the Hayes family, at least for me. My sister Brooke Hayes existed at the center of everything without ever seeming to notice she did. When she entered a room, conversations shifted toward her grades, her plans, her future. Not because she demanded it, but because my parents naturally tilted in her direction. My dad had a way of watching her that suggested he saw a reflection of himself in her confidence, her certainty, her habit of taking up space. My mom mirrored that energy, praising Brooke's ambition while nudging her gently toward every opportunity that might keep her ahead. I learned early that quiet children make things easier for everyone. I didn't have to be monitored, reminded, or corrected, and that made me a convenient afterthought. I don't say that with bitterness. It was simply the pattern we fell into. Brooke soared, and I stayed steady. In a family like ours, steadiness didn't attract much attention. As autumn settled in, college applications took over our household. Brooke spent evenings drafting essays, revising them, then revising them again. My dad hovered nearby, offering suggestions or bragging on the phone about how well she was positioning herself. He spoke about her as if her acceptance letter were already guaranteed, like the universities would rearrange themselves to make room for her. I kept my distance from those conversations, using homework as an excuse to slip away. Each time I overheard them celebrating some new accomplishment of hers, a small part of me folded inward. I didn't envy her achievements. I envied the certainty they all seemed to feel about her place in the world. I had no such blueprint. My own goals felt softer, harder to explain, and easier to dismiss. The shift began the afternoon Brooke came home later than usual, her shoulders tense and her expression locked in a way I recognized but rarely saw. For once, she didn't greet anyone. She went straight upstairs, the sound of her door closing a beat sharper than normal. My mom tried to act like nothing was unusual, but the brief glance she exchanged with my dad told a different story. Later that night, I heard Brooke pacing in her room. She wasn't talking to anyone. She was simply walking back and forth with the kind of heavy steps that suggested something had gone very wrong. I didn't ask. We weren't the kind of sisters who confided things. We coexisted with a polite distance that kept deeper conversations off limits. The next morning, during breakfast, her forced calm looked strangely fragile. She avoided my dad's eyes, and he noticed immediately. He asked about her exam results in the same tone he used when checking the weather or planning errands, as if the answer would naturally be good. She brushed him off with a vague comment that fooled no one. Whatever had happened the day before was still sitting just beneath her voice. I didn't have the full picture then, but I could sense something tightening in the atmosphere around her. Brooke excelled because she worked hard, but she also excelled because she hated slipping. Anything less than perfect forced her into a corner, and corners made her dangerous in subtle ways. I had seen it happen once or twice, but I never expected it to involve me. As the week went on, the tension around Brooke didn't ease. She spent more time in her room, and when I passed her in the hallway, she avoided eye contact in a way that felt deliberate rather than distracted. My mom checked on her constantly, asking about assignments and upcoming deadlines. My dad offered solutions before he even knew the problem. Neither of them noticed the way she flinched each time a question pushed too close to the truth. I kept watching, unsure what I was supposed to do. Something in her was unraveling, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I had a feeling her unraveling would eventually touch me. That feeling became sharper the evening Brooke sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed. I walked in for a glass of water, and she quickly shut her laptop as if she'd been caught. She didn't look ashamed. She looked determined. The kind of determined that always ended with things shifting in her favor. I didn't know it then, but that determination was the first sign of the storm forming around me, a storm I couldn't see clearly yet, but could already feel pulling at the edges of my life. The real shift showed up in small ways before it crashed down. 2 days later, Brooke was already dressed for school when I came downstairs, but she wasn't eating. Her posture was perfect, the way she held herself when adults watched, yet her eyes kept sliding to her phone. She was waiting for something. When the email alert chimed, she glanced at the screen, then set the phone face down. My dad asked how she was doing. My mom offered coffee she never drank, and Brooke answered with a short, rehearsed, "Fine." No one pressed. The tension folded into the morning like it belonged there. I decided it was just another exam, another spike in stress that had nothing to do with me. That afternoon, walking past the guidance office, I caught a glimpse of Brooke inside with the counselor. Papers and a laptop between them, the counselor leaning forward. Brooke held tight and still. I kept moving. Listening in would have crossed a line, and we had always avoided each other's private disasters. When she got home, she went straight to her room. Later, I heard a dull impact from that side of the house, not loud enough to break anything, just enough to bleed off whatever she was holding in. Whatever result she had gotten, it had fallen short of the standard people in our house treated as non-negotiable. That night at dinner, my mom mentioned a short training out of town. 2 nights away, maybe 3. My dad joked about frozen meals and laundry. Everyone smiled, and Brooke stared at her plate, turning her fork in slow circles. Nobody asked why she was quiet. The next evening, I walked into the living room to grab my charger and saw Brooke on the couch with her laptop. Columns of numbers filled the screen, the layout familiar enough that I knew it was some kind of account history. At first, I assumed she was checking tuition estimates. Then I saw her highlight a line, copy it, and paste it into a blank document. I stopped in the doorway. She didn't react. Her expression was calm in a way that made my stomach knot. She rearranged the text, took a screenshot, then cropped the image until the account name and amounts looked seamless. Every click felt intentional, like she was following a script. A weight settled in my chest. I considered asking what she was doing, but the question caught on my tongue. We didn't talk like that. We kept our distance and pretended it was respect. I stepped back into the hallway and let the moment close behind me. The day my mom left for her trip, she hugged us in the driveway, reminded my dad about the emergency contacts, and promised to be back Sunday night. Brooke smiled for her, the polished kind she used in photos. I stood a little apart and tried to ignore the sense that the house was losing its buffer. Saturday slipped by quickly. I went to a friend's place to work on a project and stayed longer than I planned. My phone stayed face down on the table until a quiet unease finally pushed me to check it. A few missed calls, one text from my dad asking when I was coming home. Nothing in the words sounded urgent, but my heart sped up anyway. When I opened our front door that evening, the air inside felt too still. The television was off. The hallway lights were on. My dad stood in the middle of the living room, hands clasped. On the coffee table, a stack of printed pages lay in a neat pile. Brooke sat on the far end of the couch, a tissue crushed in her fist, eyes rimmed with red. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Whatever story had been told in that room had already hardened into fact. My dad motioned toward the papers and said there was something I needed to explain. I stepped closer, pulse pounding, and saw my own name at the top of the first page, printed above a column of transactions I had never made. By the time I processed what I was looking at, the room had already shifted around me. My dad didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight in his posture told me he had reached a conclusion long before I walked through the door. I stood there waiting for some space to speak, but the silence locked everything in place. Whatever Brooke had shown him, whatever she had practiced saying before I arrived, it had done its job. I could feel the verdict resting between us. He asked where the money had gone, as if there were only one possible explanation. I tried to answer, but the questions came in quick succession, each one built on the last. The words blurred into a rhythm I couldn't interrupt. Brooke never looked up. She held her tissue like a prop, her shoulders trembling just enough to look believable. Watching her, I felt something unfamiliar rise in my chest. Not anger, not confusion, but a hollow disbelief that someone so close to me could seem so small and unreachable. I don't know how long I stood there trying to defend myself. The room drifted between sharp focus and dull haze. My dad listened but didn't shift, and I realized nothing I said could loosen the narrative already cemented in his mind. When he finally cut off the conversation, the finality in his tone left no space for appeal. I felt myself nod, even though I didn't understand what I was agreeing to. Later, at Jenna's house, the shock settled differently. She opened her door before I could knock twice, eyes scanning my face as if she could see everything that had just happened. I didn't know how to explain it. I sat on her bed while she handed me a blanket and told me to breathe. Words felt useless. They wouldn't have captured the odd mixture of numbness and disbelief that followed me into her room. When my phone buzzed, I already knew who it was. My dad sent a message framed as concern but soaked in disappointment. He said we would talk when I was ready to take responsibility, as if that phrase were a key I just needed to turn. I stared at the screen for a long time before setting the phone aside. There was nothing I could say that would shift his certainty. The next day, I kept quiet at school. People noticed the change in me, the way I moved more slowly, as if a piece of me had been misplaced. Jenna stayed close without hovering. She didn't ask for details, and I was grateful for that. Explaining everything felt impossible when I didn't understand it myself. When I returned to her house that afternoon, I saw a missed call from my mom. She had finally gotten home from her trip and left a brief voicemail saying she'd talk to me soon. There was something strained in her voice, something that made me think she already sensed the imbalance waiting for her at home. That evening, Jenna's parents invited me to join dinner. I tried to eat, but every sound felt too loud. I excused myself and stepped outside for some air. While I stood on the porch, another message came through from my dad. It wasn't angry, but it wasn't gentle either. He said he hoped I would reflect. The phrasing lodged itself in my mind. Reflect on what? On something I didn't do? On a version of myself someone else had invented? I didn't respond. Later that night, Jenna sat beside me on the floor and quietly sorted through her sketch supplies. She didn't offer advice or reassurance. She didn't try to fix anything. Just being near someone who didn't look at me with suspicion softened something tight in my chest. The next morning, I woke to a text from my mom asking if I could talk later. No explanation, no urgency, just a request. I didn't know what she had walked into, or what version of the story she had heard before she called me. I only knew I couldn't handle another conversation built on assumptions. By the time evening came, my phone buzzed again. This time, I hesitated before checking it. The message was short, only a few words, but something about it made me sit up straighter. My mom wanted to see me. Alone. The message from my mom stayed on my screen longer than it should have, as if reading it again might reveal something hidden between the words. I didn't know what she expected from the conversation, but there was a steadiness in her tone that set it apart from everything my dad had sent. I told Jenna I needed to meet her, and she offered to drive me. No questions asked. When we pulled into my driveway, the house looked unchanged, but something in me tightened. I walked to the porch slowly, aware that every step carried the weight of whatever waited inside. My mom opened the door before I could knock. She didn't hug me. She just stepped aside and let me in, her expression too controlled to read. She led me to the dining room where the table had been cleared except for a small notepad and a pen placed neatly beside it. I sat across from her, unsure how to start. She didn't speak right away. For several seconds, she studied me as if trying to understand a story written in fading ink. When she finally asked me to tell her what happened, the request was simple. Not loaded, not framed like an accusation. I recounted the evening as best I could. How I walked in, how my dad confronted me, how Brooke sat apart from everything yet somehow orchestrated it all. I didn't embellish or soften anything. I kept my voice steady because falling apart wouldn't serve me now. My mom listened without interrupting. She didn't defend anyone or try to offer explanations. When I finished, she let out a slow breath and looked down at the note she had taken. The silence stretched, but not uncomfortably. It felt like she was lining up pieces in her mind, parts of the story that weren't fitting together the way she had been told. She said she wanted all of us in one place. Now. I didn't want to stay for the confrontation, but something in her tone made refusing impossible. She called my dad first, then Brooke. Both answers were brief. Both agreed to come downstairs. My dad arrived first. He looked at me with the same guarded expression he had worn during his messages, as if waiting for me to provide a confession that would make everything easier. Brooke entered a moment later, her gaze fixed on the floor, her posture carefully composed. My mom didn't ease into the conversation. She asked Brooke to retrieve her laptop. The request landed like a spark in dry grass. My dad frowned, confused, but didn't interfere. Brooke hesitated only a second before going to her room. When she returned, she held the laptop close, like she wasn't sure whether to protect it or hide behind it. My mom told her to open the account she had shown my dad. Brooke clicked slowly, scrolling through the same columns of numbers I had seen days before. My mom asked her to expand the transaction history, not just the cropped lines. Brooke's hands stilled. For a moment, she didn't move at all. My dad leaned forward, eyebrows drawn together. My mom's voice remained calm, but something sharpened beneath it. She asked Brooke to show every step she took to produce the documents printed on the table. Brooke didn't look at me. She didn't look at either of them. Instead, she minimized the window, then reopened it, then hovered over a folder she didn't click. The silence pressed down on us until my mom finally asked her again, more firmly this time. That was when Brooke broke. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just a small, collapsing sound in her breath as she closed the laptop entirely and set it on the table with both hands. She admitted she created the screenshot. She admitted the numbers weren't real. She admitted she was afraid of what her score would do to her chances, and she didn't want to lose the trust she believed she had earned. My dad didn't speak. His expression emptied, like he'd been unmoored from something he relied on. My mom kept her focus on Brooke, asking questions that couldn't be dodged. Why me? Why this approach? Why she let it go so far? Brooke didn't have answers that made sense. She only had fear, pressure, and a desperation she hadn't been able to contain. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The truth had unfolded without me lifting a finger. For the first time since everything started, the story wasn't out of my control anymore. What followed didn't unfold quickly. It stretched into a strange, suspended quiet, as if the house itself didn't know how to absorb the truth that had just been spoken. My dad stayed seated, staring at the closed laptop like it might rearrange its contents if he waited long enough. My mom shifted her attention between him and Brooke, keeping her expression steady even though something tight had settled beneath her voice. She asked my dad if he understood what had actually happened. The question wasn't harsh, but it carried a clarity that didn't allow for hesitation. He didn't answer right away. He opened his mouth once, closed it, then rubbed his forehead with the heel of his hand. Watching him struggle with what he had believed felt surreal. For days, he had held on to an imagined version of me built from doctored numbers and a trembling performance. Now it collapsed in front of him, leaving him with nothing but the realization that he had chosen the wrong person to trust. Brooke wiped her face with the crumpled tissue still in her hand. She wasn't crying anymore. She seemed drained in a way that made her look older and smaller at the same time. My mom kept her focus on her, asking when the idea started, what pushed her toward it, and whether she understood the consequences waiting beyond this room. With each answer, Brooke looked further away from all of us. She didn't offer excuses. She didn't deny anything. She only admitted things in fragmented pieces, too quietly to feel like a confession. When my mom mentioned the possibility of academic review, how the school might investigate if they learned she manipulated financial documents, Brooke flinched. Not dramatically, just enough for the reaction to land deeply. My dad raised his head at that, finally connecting the dots beyond the emotional fallout in our family. It wasn't just a mistake. It was something that could follow Brooke into college applications, scholarship committees, and every interview she had been preparing for. My mom wasn't threatening her. She was naming the reality Brooke had refused to acknowledge. I sat still through all of it. I didn't interrupt. I didn't tear into Brooke, even though part of me wanted to ask why she chose me, why she let fear twist into something so calculated. My questions wouldn't have changed anything. They would have only fed the disaster already unraveling in front of us. My dad finally looked at me. The weight of his stare made it difficult to breathe. He didn't apologize. Not then. Not in that moment. What he offered instead was a quiet, unsteady acknowledgement that he had made a mistake. It wasn't enough. It wasn't close. But it was the first time in days he looked at me without suspicion. My mom ended the conversation before it spiraled further. She said we all needed space, and that this wasn't something resolved in a night. Her tone left no room for argument. She asked my dad to help clean up the papers. She told Brooke to stay downstairs until she returned. Then she gestured for me to follow her to the hallway. Once we were out of sight, she asked if I was staying at Jenna's again, or if I wanted to come home. I didn't know how to answer. The house didn't feel like a place that could hold me safely yet, but I wasn't sure staying away was better. I told her I needed time to think. She nodded, not pushing, not assuming she had earned the right to demand anything of me. When I stepped outside, the air felt colder than I expected. Jenna waited in her car with the engine running. I slid into the passenger seat, and she didn't ask what happened. She only glanced at me once, as if checking whether I was intact enough to make it through the night. Back at her house, I lay awake for hours replaying the confrontation. Brooke's voice, my dad's silence, my mom's control, all of it spiraled in my mind without settling. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt relieved. Instead, the truth left a bruise in a place I couldn't name. The damage Brooke created didn't vanish with her confession. It lingered, sharp and sprawling, shaping everything that came next in ways none of us could take back. 3 months passed before anything in my life resembled routine again. The shock had faded, but the impact of those days continued to shape everything beneath the surface. Nothing in our house erupted anymore. The quiet itself became the reminder of what had happened. A thin, fragile layer stretched over damage none of us knew how to address. I started meeting with Dr. Robert Lane every other week. My mom arranged it after realizing that giving me space wasn't enough. I didn't fight the idea. Sitting in his office felt different from sitting anywhere else. He didn't look at me like he was searching for a reason to blame me or a way to solve me. He listened without trying to redirect the story, letting me speak in my own rhythm. It was the first place where my voice didn't feel like an interruption. During one session, he asked whether I planned to rebuild trust with my family. I didn't know how to answer. Trust wasn't a project I could pick up and piece together. It felt more like something I had to relearn slowly, without promising anyone how long it would take. He nodded as if the uncertainty itself was a sign of progress. At home, my mom tried to keep things steady. She stopped forcing conversations and focused on small gestures, leaving dinner in the fridge when she knew I'd be late, checking in without hovering, offering help only when I asked. Her approach didn't erase the hurt, but it created a space where I could breathe without feeling cornered. My dad stayed quieter than usual. He no longer spoke with the confidence he once carried, especially around me. When we crossed paths, his greetings were careful, almost apologetic in their restraint. He tried to make himself available, lingering in the kitchen longer than necessary or asking if I needed anything before he left for work. But the attempts felt separate from the damage already done. I didn't shut him out, but I didn't let him all the way in either. There was no anger left, only distance, a natural consequence of what he had believed so quickly. Brooke, meanwhile, moved through the house like she was afraid of disturbing the air. She avoided dramatic apologies. Instead, she offered small ones, a hesitant acknowledgement in passing, a quiet admission in the hallway, brief but sincere. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't pretend we could go back to how things were. She simply tried to exist without creating new harm. Her grades recovered slowly, but her reputation at school didn't bounce back as easily. Rumors traveled, and the academic review my mom had warned about became a real concern. The fallout didn't destroy her future, but it carved a scar into it. She had to work twice as hard to regain trust she once took for granted. My grandmother, Evelyn Hayes, visited more often during that time. She had a way of observing without intruding, offering company without questions. She never took sides, never tried to repair what wasn't ready to be fixed. Her presence was steady in a way the rest of the family wasn't. Life didn't return to its old shape. It simply shifted into something unfamiliar, but manageable. I still spent nights at Jenna's house sometimes, not because I needed to escape, but because the space felt neutral. My parents didn't push back. They understood that one conversation or confession couldn't rebuild the foundation that had cracked beneath us. The night everything changed. The night I walked out into the rain without defending myself. Replayed in my mind sometimes, but not with the same intensity. It became a reference point rather than a wound. I didn't feel proud of how I handled it, but I understood why I reacted that way. When trust collapses so quickly, silence can feel like the only shield you have left. I never held on to the idea of a perfect reconciliation. We didn't reach one. What we found instead was a fragile kind of coexistence, shaped by honesty we had avoided for years. Some distances remained. Some conversations stayed unfinished. But there was movement, slow, imperfect, but real. One evening, after a session with Dr. Lane, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet. The same quiet that once felt threatening, but this time it didn't press down on me. It simply existed. I realized then that healing wasn't about returning to who we were before. It was about learning to stand in the present without carrying every broken piece like proof of what had gone wrong. I didn't forgive Brooke completely. I didn't blame her entirely either. People make terrible choices when they're cornered by expectations. Understanding that doesn't erase the harm, but it keeps the harm from defining you. As for my dad, I still kept a gentle distance. Trust would grow slowly, if at all, but I wasn't closing the door on the possibility. And me? I learned something I never expected, that walking away isn't always the moment you lose something. Sometimes it's the moment you reclaim yourself. So now I'm curious. If you were in my place, facing family betrayal, pressure, and the possibility of rebuilding, would you try to forgive? Or would you walk your own path and leave the past where it fell? Thank you for listening to my story. I'd really like to hear yours.